Shalom and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be discussing about the importance of fighting for Western civilization. Warm welcome to the programme, and I have a very special guest who's also a good friend of mine, all the way over from the States, and that is Gloria Greenfield, President of Doc Emmett Productions. Gloria, welcome back on the Middle East Report.
It's such a pleasure to be here, such an honour to be here with you. Thank you.
Likewise, and we're here to talk about your new film, which is called The Fight of Our Lives, and we've seen before the excellent film you produced called The Case for Israel and Body and Soul, which we've done programmes on. But can I say that your latest film, The Fight for Our Lives, is incredible. It's such a powerful film and documentary. And this film should be shown to journalists, politicians, opinion makers, because at stake is our Western civilization. So I thank you for your moral courage, for making such an incredible, compelling and a necessary film for the time in which we're living in.
Thank you. It was a very important film for me to make because following the previous three films, The Case for Israel, Unmasked Judeophobia, and Body and Soul, The State of the Jewish Nation, I felt it was really important that we look at the bigger context, and the bigger context being the ideological war against the West. And when we talk about the West, we're talking about Western civilization, and Western civilization is founded on the Hebrew Bible, on Judeo-Christian values. It helps us understand when we connect the dots that this war, in order for any enemy to defeat the West, to destroy the West, one has to destroy, demonize and destroy Judeo-Christian values and demonize and persecute Christians and Jews, which is what we've been seeing. And unfortunately, the persecution of Christians just has been increasing with this external force by jihadist movements. But it's very important. It's very important for us to understand that we must work together, that we can't work in silos. And that's what this film is about. This film is about a wake-up call to all those who value the freedoms and values that we live under in Western civilization, and to understand that these threats are coming both from internal forces and from external forces.
Can you share with us, Gloria, some of the challenges you had making this documentary, and how's it gone down with a kind of outside of a kind of strong Jewish, Christian, conservative audience?
It was this film was particularly challenging because I produced this film at a time when the totalitarian forces that we're being confronted with in the West are getting stronger. More people are intimidated about not only speaking about issues and perspectives that aren't in line what gets referred to as politically correct thoughts, but people are also, it's not just being afraid of speaking it, it's also this fear of thinking it. In a sense, many people in the West have been given a script of headlines of what they can say, and even though they don't have the content, because there's not a lot of content that goes with these headlines, they're just propaganda. And so people can't really rationally talk about it, but they just have these things, well, I'm supposed to think this, I'm supposed to think that. And when they get confronted with reality, when they get confronted with the reality of what will happen to their lives if we don't sustain our values that are based in freedoms and liberties and faith, they get very anxious and just shut down. So it was a matter of finding people with the courage to associate themselves with the film, to support the film. And so that was really the biggest challenge. Now that the film is done, it's being very well received by those people and those institutes that are leading the charges to fight these assaults on our freedoms, and it's being shunned, if not demonized, by those who are appalled that it doesn't perpetuate politically correct thoughts, and it's actually challenging these thoughts and speaking truth.
Absolutely. So let's have a look now at extract of Gloria's latest film, which is The Fight for Our Lives.
Civilizations, empires, great powers can fall apart very fast. Collapse can come suddenly like a thief in the night. And we should be very wary of assuming that our civilization, the civilization of the early 21st century West, will oblige us by declining gradually. I think a lot of people who look at the United States and debate its decline, even the pessimistic ones, assume that this will take decades, and perhaps it will be a problem for their grandchildren. When people talk about Europe's problems, there's a tendency to say, well, the demographic difficulties of Europe and the slowdown in European growth mean that over time it will recede in its importance relative to the past. But that may be completely wrong. We may in fact find that Europe falls apart quite fast. Not only Europe in the sense of the European Union, but I mean Europe in the cultural sense, as the heir of centuries of what used to be called Christendom. The mass migrations that we see into Europe at this time, and the social consequences of trying, and I suspect not succeeding, in integrating millions of people from non-European cultures, particularly from the Islamic world, raises the prospect of a major crisis of European culture. And the civilization that we've grown accustomed to thinking of as Europe may not be around by the end of the century, or it may have changed so much that it's unrecognizable.
I think there are two threats facing the West, and they are linked. There's the threat from within and the threat from without. And the threat from without is made much more threatening by the threat from within. The threat from within comes from people who want to undermine and destroy the basis of Western civilization, the basis of Western society.
Europe was ravaged after a period of ultranationalism and conflict, the period between World War I and World War II, and World War II itself with the Shoah and the complete devastation of Europe economically, socially, culturally. Adorno argued that Europe actually died in Auschwitz, that this was the marking of an end of an era and the marking of complete devastation. The infrastructure was destroyed, perhaps the morality, the teachings were really called into question. And philosophers and thinkers of the time looked at the horrible consequences of extreme nationalism and binary notions of identity, of being and otherness.
This continues in philosophy with existentialism and what eventually will be known as postmodern theory. These are the ways that you can see that sense of doubt, of failure, of collapse inside Western confidence and optimism. So I think the wars really are the beginning of this. And it continues. It continues on to the 50s, and then into the 60s. You have another generation, a new revolutionary generation that is reacting against everything their parents represent.
The baby boomer generation, of whom I am one, were extremely influenced in the 1960s by the writing in particular of Gramsci, the political philosopher. And Gramsci's whole thing was effectively to say, if you're going to wait for the workers to rise up and seize the levers of economic and political control, you wait forever. A much more effective and much, much smarter way of undermining and taking over Western society is to attack the citadels of the culture, the media, the universities, education, the law, the church, all the institutions of the culture. You infiltrate them and you undermine them from within, and you turn the mind of the West against itself.
And there can be no doubt about it that this documentary is a film for our time. Gloria, just seeing that extract, and we saw the likes of Melanie Phillips, who many of our viewers will know very well, and she's been a champion for this cause, a champion for Israel, a champion for Britain, and a champion for our Judeo-Christian heritage. But when we just listen to what's being said, it's almost as if there is a complete Marxist penetration culturally within our society, that many thought that Marxism collapsed with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, but what we're seeing probably in our day is the impact of cultural Marxism upon our universities, our academia, our media and everything else. How has the West allowed itself to get in that state where we're actually threatened by this ideology that hates everything that represents our Judeo-Christian heritage?
Well, there's a couple of points that should be made about that. One is that many people think that the KGB put all their focus into gathering intelligence, but in fact, the majority of the work that the KGB was engaged in was demoralizing the West. And they planted the seeds into the left. This has been going on for some time, going back to the 50s and the 60s. So while people have celebrated that the Soviet Union fell, in fact, they're still harvesting what they've planted. But also, following the Second World War, following the Holocaust, there was a demoralization that just continued to grow in Europe, and you had philosophers like Foucault and Edward Said who developed a whole perspective of looking at the West as the West being all that is wrong in the world. And that philosophy, as a matter of fact, they had even celebrated during the ramping up of the Iranian Revolution. They celebrated Khomeini and the Iranian Revolution, saying this was the best thing that could have ever happened to the Iranian people. That's how demented they were. And unfortunately, that philosophy penetrated Western universities, and it's still living today. The impact that philosophers like Foucault and Edward Said have had on the West is devastating, where again, all evil emanates from Western imperialism, that there is nothing good in that comes from the West, and that Marxist-Leninism is the answer. And so you have college students today throughout the West, whether we're talking about Europe or Australia or Canada and the United States, who are saying that, Marxism, socialism, even though they don't know what socialism really represents, that socialism is the answer, capitalism is terrible, and we see the impact wherever we look. And it's not just in the universities anymore, because the graduates of the universities are in the schools teaching. So this Marxist-Leninist philosophy and perspective, and some call it a cultural Marxism, and some say, no, it's actually Marxist-Leninism, in a slightly modified way, but I'm not sure it's so modified. I mean, this is what the internal forces, this is what the anti-Western ideas and movements are going for, and also the previous administration in the United States was going for. And it's a real problem because it also pushes secularization. It brings with it all of those elements of Marxist-Leninism. And so we see in the UK the closing down of churches. We see throughout the West this diminishment of people of faith. And we've got a real problem on our hands.
Absolutely. And what's the extent at universities? You know, we're having a generation of students who will go on to be our future leaders, being almost brainwashed to actually think and being conditioned to think in such a way that they can't actually develop any form of critical thinking themselves and looking at the world objectively. So it's almost as if the students in the 60s were famous for kind of being rebellious and rebelling against their parents and that generation. And yet today we have a generation that's reinforcing those values that are being controlled and they think they're being rebellious, but in fact they're showing nothing but being conformed and conformality.
You're right on target with that. You know, it's political correctness was developed in the Soviet Union, and what it was this is what you're allowed to speak. This is what you're allowed to think, and if you dare go against that, then you will be thrown in the gulag, or you will lose all of your social network. You will be isolated. You will be put in cherem, really, and that's what's happening today. And people don't even understand what political correctness means. It doesn't mean that these are the thoughts that really are the best for the world. It means that this is what you have to say. And if you say anything else, you're going to be isolated. You're going to be tainted. And that's what's going on in university campuses. So there have been several articles recently in the media talking about how and surprisingly enough, the New York Times just published an article that admits to this, that while it was the left that used to champion free speech, today the left is opposed to free speech, and it's the right, it's the conservative thinkers that's championing free speech. The left doesn't want to champion anymore because they're not the only ones who are going for free speech. They want free speech when it's only their perspective. They don't want free speech for the other side. You know, the great late Menachem Begin articulated very clearly that without an opposition, you can't have a democracy. You need an opposition. Well, the left doesn't want an opposition anymore. In the United States, I'll only speak about the United States in this matter because
Sure.
It's as though the two-party system is no longer respected. There's not an appreciation of why you need to have a two-party system. So that when you have an opposition, then it continually forces you to refine your thinking. It creates a better situation. When you only have one party, you wind up with totalitarianism.
Absolutely. So let's have a look now at the problem within our academic institutions regarding our fight for our lives.
Let's be honest, there is an increasing growth of programs on college campuses, universities. Many of them are in response to political agitation. They are not necessarily there for pedagogical reasons. And so we have various studies programs that are out there, which are designed not to teach students how to think, but to teach students what to think.
In universities, there is almost a kind of an intellectual masochism, a sense that we should not be proud of the values that we stand for, that we even need to engage in a kind of a ritual self-flagellation, discarding the names of the founders of our institutions and disregarding the values that our universities and that our country were founded upon.
Even the university that the third president of the United States of America, the man who wrote our Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, who founded the University of Virginia, the students there do not want Jefferson quoted because he once owned slaves.
So we're going to go back through history and we're going to pick winners and losers according to our own particular passing value system. And now that passing value system is race, class, and gender. And maybe it won't be tomorrow or the next day, but we're going to rename things. We're going to Trotskyize art. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that all the people in the past fit our idea of a ethical race, class, and gender person.
A lot of our academic elite sees itself as in an adversarial posture to the received institutions of America and of Western society. And so when Yale let it be known that it had accepted a large grant to create a Western Civilization program, a lot of these folks, and they're active and vocal, said, not here if we can help it. And eventually they were successful. It is indeed not there.
There is too little in our universities being taught about what the admirable aspects of the Western tradition are. So, too few students graduate from our universities having read classics of the liberal tradition. Alexis de Tocqueville, John Stuart Mill, the Federalist Papers, Immanuel Kant. It's fairly easy now to graduate from even excellent universities without having read people who made the best arguments for human rights, for liberal democracy, for political pluralism.
We are, in a way, more dependent upon education and virtue in our citizenry than any other kind of regime, because in our regimes, liberal and democratic regimes, the citizens have huge responsibility. We vote for the leaders. We make those decisions.
Frequently, it's the universities where rather negative notions begin to become hegemonic and are picked up by students and then broadcast out to the society. If you look at the history of the German university in this respect, which across the 19th century became the great source of Western research and teaching, the German universities failed in the late 20s and 30s. They became hotbeds for either communism on the one hand or Nazism on the other.
For the last 15, perhaps even 20 years, Western universities have been receiving funds with strings attached from Islamic countries, but also China. For example, Georgetown University and Harvard have each received $20 million from Prince Al-Walid of Saudi Arabia. This was in 2005. Then there was a series of scandals in England when they found that the London School of Economics was receiving money from Muammar Gaddafi of Libya. And they also received at least $9 million from the United Arab Emirates. The University of Durham signed a memorandum with the Iranian government. They had to agree to certain conditions. And of course, you're not allowed to teach Islam in any way which the people who are funding these departments disagree with. So you even have the case of scholars like Daniel Easterman, who was teaching at the University of Newcastle. He was thrown out for teaching Islam in a way that the Saudis did not approve of.
In some schools at San Francisco State University, for example, you will not get a good grade in a Middle Eastern Studies department if you have any type of pro-Zionist point of view or so-called pro-Israel point of view. Students are actually discouraged from signing up for classes. And it has been the case, for example, at San Francisco State University, where professors have gone on trips to the Middle East, have met with representatives of designated terrorist groups, and are bringing back the knowledge that they have learned from these terrorist groups into the Middle Eastern studies departments. And it has radicalized youth on US campuses. We have an example where students are posting, again, on Facebook at SFSU, pictures of themselves holding knives, saying that they want to kill Israelis and to intimidate Jews. You have pro-Israel or Jewish students who can't even walk around campus with a Jewish star.
Shows you the extent of the serious problem facing our academic institutions as our academia is under threat. That brings back quite a few memories, just seeing that extract from your latest film there, Fight for Our Lives, Gloria, because it's chilling. The fact is that academic freedom of expression is now under serious threat, which is one of our foundational structures for our democracy. And if this one goes, I dread to think what would happen. How have we allowed a situation where our universities are meant to be places of freedom of thought, freedom of academic expression, learning about ideas and having ideas shaped, and yet they seem that they're actually being incredibly threatened? And if academic freedom of expression is closed down because you have an alternative viewpoint, then this ultimately means that surely then democracy starts to be eroded, and before you know it's gone.
Absolutely. It's as though the administration of many of these universities are being held hostage by radicals in the student body. And they are not, the administrations at many of these universities are not standing up and enforcing discipline and consequence to behaviors. There are so many examples of this. And the students are also being, they're weak. Even though they stand up and they protest and they may riot, but their character is weak because they cannot handle, they've been so pampered that they cannot handle debate. They cannot handle the challenge of processing another perspective. They don't have to accept another perspective, but they have to process. They have to be able to process it, and they have to be able to engage in civil discourse with opposing views. And if they can't do that, they're going to fail in the future. But to the extent of the demand for trigger warnings and the labeling of so-called microaggressions. There are students who think that they could actually go to law school and be an effective lawyer, or go to medical school and be an effective doctor, while they can't even handle in a literature class reading a novel that might involve rape. So how are they going to help a rape victim if they can't read a book, if they need a trigger warning so that they can decide whether they can remain in the classroom to read that book? I mean, it's insanity.
Absolutely. Also, in terms of linking this, is the attack on our historic figures. That extract we showed of your latest film showed two dangers there that arose. And we've seen this in recent months. One, there's been a fundamental attack on Winston Churchill's statue outside Parliament. And then probably one of the most famous London landmarks is Nelson Square. And Lord Nelson is under attack. And it was Lord Nelson that helped the British Navy to defeat Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars. And yet he's then been associated with the slave trade. And so therefore we got rid of him. When he's not politically correct. Even though he defended our nation, no other nation challenged the British Navy for 200 years because of the Battle of Trafalgar.
As Victor Davis Hanson brilliantly explains in the film, what's been happening is this revisionism of going back and judging leaders in the past with the standards of today. And in a sense, it's like Trotskyizing our history. It's changing our history. We have one university in the United States that replaced, in a humanities building, replaced the portrait of Shakespeare with a portrait of Audre Lorde, the lesbian feminist black poet. I mean, this is insanity. I mean, it's, we wind up with living in a make-believe world because everything gets rewritten. Everything gets rewritten, and it also, one of the things that we learned from the Bible, if we engage in Bible study, we learned that none of our patriarchs or matriarchs were perfect. Everybody had flaws, but that's part of human nature. You have flaws, and you work to you work to go past those flaws, to refine those flaws, so that you can do the things that we were each meant to do in this world. That's not what is held today by this new generation that thinks that everybody should be perfect. But then, what is their definition of perfection? It's also, I think, a result of secularization and this feeling that man is the creator. Man is the creator, so I guess they would be really offended that I said man is the creator. But man is the creator, and so everything else is a social construct. So since everything is a social construct, we could go back then and construct a new history. We could make pretend what the past was by getting rid of everything that doesn't fit in our perspective of what the world should be today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also we see in your film, which makes it very, very clear that there is the internal battle for our Judeo-Christian heritage, and there's also the external battle as well. So it's almost like these two opposing forces that share complete contrasting ideology and viewpoint. I mean, Islamic extremism and that of the hard left,
yes.
Yet find common ground because they see the enemy is our Judeo-Christian heritage, and we've got to destroy that at all costs. So it really is an unholy alliance. Can you explain more why you emphasize this in your film?
Because that's the reality. The reality is that if we didn't have the internal threats, if we didn't have ideas and movements internally that were trying to destroy our societies within the West, we wouldn't be vulnerable to the threats from outside. We become, it's really easy to come in because we have so many vacuums. If we destroy, look, the West and our societies were built. The Hebrew Bible is the foundation.
Absolutely.
Everything comes out of that, as Robert Nicholson, expounds in the film. The way that we think, our stories, our literature, our philosophies, it all comes from that. When you start destroying the foundation, you're left with nothing, and you're left with no passion. So our enemies, who are very passionate about their quest for world domination, can just come right in. And while young people and older people who are in the hard left are saying that religion is bad, what they're really saying is Judaism and Christianity are bad, but they would never say that radical Islamists are bad.
Let's have a look now at another extract from this excellent film, The Fight for Our Lives.
100 years ago, people were committing terrorist acts in the name of radical nationalism, in the name of extreme socialism, Marxism, Leninism. They were committing terrorist acts in pursuit of a variety of different secular ideologies. In our time, most terrorist acts, and one can base this on the data gathered by the START project at the University of Maryland, most terrorist acts, about 80%, are perpetrated by groups with some affiliation or another to Islamic extremism. They carry out most of the attacks, they claim most of the victims. In that sense, terrorism in our time has become predominantly a tactic of Islamic extremists.
Political Islam is about Islamist supremacy. It's about hegemony and control of not only the Muslim world, but the Western world as well. And that is dangerous because it comes with violence, it comes with no respect for anyone following a different path.
The scourge of terrorism is yet another manifestation of a totalitarian mindset that is intolerant of those who have different views. We have to be able to affirm and live by the principle that we cannot be tolerant of the intolerant. And unless we do that, we lose.
A refusal to make the connection between Islamic jihad and Islam itself is going to make matters worse. Because how can you defeat an enemy you won't name? How can you defeat an ideology you refuse to understand?
One of the weaknesses of the West, to my understanding, is that somehow in their arrogance, they perceive the radicals to be these uncivilized ignoramuses, working out of a cave in Tora Bora. And I don't know how much effort has been made to know the enemy, but the enemy definitely knows about us.
If one looks at the world as a whole, it's clear that Islamic extremism is a lethal virus that is killing a lot of people. What we must do is to stop it spreading. And the danger is that it will continue to spread. It has been increasing in the magnitude of killings quite steeply since the onset of the so-called Arab Spring. The trend is, I think, pretty clearly upwards. And the number of groups seems also to be increasing. The number of converts to various forms of Islamic extremism also seems to be rising.
The Muslim Brotherhood dedicates its activities to dawah. And dawah is this complex system of persuading first Muslims and then inviting non-Muslims into the fold of Islam. An extension of dawah is jihad, and the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda are the militant, if you will, arm of dawah. So their objectives are the same because they all aspire to societies governed by Islamic law, and their aspiration is global. It starts local. It starts within a unit as small as the individual, and then the family, the immediate community, the local, the nation, and it expands to the whole world.
The Brotherhood strategy in the West is subversion, it's stealth, it's burrowing into a host society and eating away at it from within. That's the strategy. Getting jobs in sensitive, influential positions, whether it's government, media, academia, community organizations in the local, the state, and the federal level.
Very chilling. Gloria, I think we have to discuss this particular topic. And this is where I think the biggest contradiction comes between the hard left, the extreme secular humanists and their cohorts, the Islamic fundamentalists who come together to achieve their goal, which is the destruction of our Western civilization, Judeo-Christian heritage. But when is the realization from the West going to come in to realize that everything they so-called represent is going to be challenged and destroyed? Freedom for women, the whole LGBT movement that they support, all these other agendas that they support is going to come absolutely crashing down under Sharia law and under an Islamic government if heaven forbid that Islam ever takes over the West.
Look, in a sense, in a very strong sense, the hard left are the useful idiots for the jihadist movements.
Yes.
That's what they are. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that you have women who identify themselves as being feminists who justify the complete entrapment of Muslim women in living in tents. They justify honor killing by saying that who are we to judge another culture? We can't judge another culture. The gay movement that aligns itself with the left and that support and with the jihadist movements, they don't realize that they're going to be thrown off of the roofs of buildings like gays in Muslim countries are. It's an insanity. But it is a true illustration of what a useful idiot is. They have no idea that that's the role that they're serving. Now, it's true that the hard left does want to destroy our society. But as you said, they don't understand that by aligning with these terrorists, that they're next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a message that we have to send to them loud and clear. Gloria, also, I think what I've noticed in recent years, particularly in British society now, is this kind of normalization of Islamicization. And what I mean by that is the fact that we see TV adverts or TV commercials now, and they predominantly push women in hijabs on television commercials, advertisements, news, and it's almost as if this is now acceptable part of British culture, when that is actually a symbol of oppression, and it's a Wahhabi symbol of oppression. So how can we then say, on the one hand, yeah, we're going to do everything we can to support women's rights, and kind of rightly so, but with that is this mix, yep, we're going to promote the Islamicization of women. So where does the contradiction come, and when does the realization that this is actually taking place?
You know, I understand that I will probably be offending many very good British people by saying this, but it seems to me that Britain is living as Chamberlain, that they think that their appeasement and their embrace of this culture that snubs its nose at freedoms, they think that if they do that, they're going to be okay, they're going to survive this, they're not going to be murdered. And that's very sad, because in a way they're being collaborators. I don't understand how any woman does not start trembling when she sees women who are completely covered with just a little mesh at their eyes. I mean, do they really think that that's a symbol of liberation because they don't have to make sure that their hair looks good that day? I mean, it's absolute insanity, or embracing cultures that chop the hands off of robbers. Not that robbers should be glorified, robbers should be imprisoned, but to chop their hands off? To behead Westerners on TV? I mean, we're talking about, now, I am not saying that every Muslim is a jihadist, and we know that a minority of Muslims in the world are jihadists and are fully intent on dominating the world. But the truth is that the population of Muslims is so big that we're talking about millions of jihadists who want to dominate the world with Sharia law. So I think that we need to really pray hard for Churchill to stand up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking about a Churchill, we seem to have a president in the United States, President Trump, who seems to be backing this whole entire trend. You know, I don't know what he's going to make when he will watch your film. I'm sure that it will get to Mike Pence, and I'm sure your film will actually get to the president as well. What impact do you think that your film, The Fight for Our Lives, will have on President Trump and his policies for really bringing the United States out of this globalist movement?
I don't think that there's anything in the film that he wouldn't agree with. I mean, it's not that his mind needs to be changed or enlightened. I mean, I think that he's fully aware of what the situation is, and most of his administration is as well. Not everyone, but most of them are, and thank God for that, because we need, President Trump right now plays many different aspects of his presidency are very important, but he plays a very important role as it's a corrective. It's a corrective for this environment that the United States is coming out of this suffocating political correctness, of this apologetic stance for who we are, for the reality that in order for the United States to be leaders in the world, which we need to be, the world wants us to be leaders, the Western world, we have to have strong defense. And we're coming out of this period where defense was really whittled away. So he knows that we're in an ideological war, and he knows that we're also in a more traditional war as well. And that is why I believe very strongly that is why he is saying the things that he's saying. Because his message is political correctness is useless, not only useless, but it's destructive.
Okay, let's see the final extract of Gloria's superb film, The Fight for Our Lives, which is an attack on Christians and also on our precious Jewish community.
In 2016 alone, more Christians were martyred than any other year in the last 2,000 years. The rate is one Christian every 6 minutes is martyred somewhere around the world. And by being martyred for the faith, for the Christian faith, by that I mean that it was because of their identification with the Christian message and all that that represents that they gave their life.
The persecution of Christians in the Middle East is significant, and a lot of observers and analysts have essentially said it's worse than at any time in history. It's worse than the famous Roman pagan persecution under Diocletian and 4th century. And now a lot of the persecution that goes on, essentially the burning down of churches, the abduction of Christian women and children, the killing of apostates, Muslims who convert to Christianity, attacking, imprisoning, sometimes killing so-called blasphemers. For instance, in Pakistan, a wife and a husband, Christian couple, were literally burned alive because they were accused of somehow offending Muhammad. And, you know, some countries like in Nigeria, a week doesn't go by when I don't read about dozens of Christians being killed by groups like Boko Haram. But not just Boko Haram, and that's the important thing to understand. It's not just formal Islamic terrorist groups. This is happening by mobs. This is happening by Muslim individuals. This is happening by Muslim governments, such as our good friend and ally, Saudi Arabia, which has a fatwa saying if ever any church is found, it must be destroyed on the peninsula in accordance with the Prophet's wishes, which is recorded in one of his hadith.
Even though we in the West want to say, look, it's not a holy war, this is not a Christian, Jewish, Muslim conflict, many Muslims, even though they're a minority of the Muslim world, I mean, these are millions of people, see the world and the future in exactly those terms. This is jihad. This is a holy war, our God versus your God, and we are going to win. And that is what they're saying. And we in the West, many of us, we're so reluctant to talk in those terms. We're so reluctant to talk about our God or our values or our culture beyond sort of the merest mention of democracy or something like that, that we don't know what to say in return. So we just stand there as they speak, trying to talk past them, and they are not changing their mind whatsoever. They see this as a holy war, and they are not going to stop until they win.
All of us need to watch this film, The Fight for Our Lives, which is Gloria's latest film. We need to show this in our churches. This needs to be a huge wake-up call throughout the nation of Great Britain, and everyone should watch it. I just want to, we've got last 5 minutes of the programme, Gloria. I just want to thank you so much, not only for being my guest, but for the passion and the courage to make such a film, to show the bravery that's needed, but also to show and warn our nations, to warn the West of the dangers that we're in. It almost feels as if we're in the time of Jeremiah, before the coming destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and this urgent wake-up call to return to our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and to return to our Judeo-Christian values, which is essentially the Bible, which is the foundation of Western civilization. And this is what is the theme that comes across so powerfully in your film. What do you think the world would be like in 10, 15 years' time if our leaders, our political leaders, our academics, our journalists, those who have a big impact upon our society and its values, don't take the warning from your film? What is the state that Western society will be in, say, in 10, 15 years' time?
I think it's unthinkable what would happen if we don't turn things around. Now, I do want to say that I don't think it's necessary for us to have a majority of the West to wake up. We need a very strong minority to wake up, and if we look historically, the majority of Jews did not leave Egypt with Moses, but a good minority did. I mean, the numbers fluctuate according to, some people say 20% left with Moses, some say 40% left with Moses. But it's not just that event where we learn that you need a strong minority and you don't have to wait to get a strong majority. We know it throughout history that if you have a strong minority, a strong resistance, and people of faith who have the passion and the commitment and determination to fight evil, to fight for the good, we don't have to do it alone because we have God on our side.
Amen. Absolutely. And most important, how can our viewers get hold of your superb film, The Fight for Our Lives?
If they go to the website, thefightofOurLives.com, you can order the DVD right from there.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. And, it's an incredibly powerful film that you produced, Gloria, as well. What have people been saying about your film? The good positives.
It's one of the wonderful things about the film is that it is being seen and used as a resource by very important institutes and think tanks. For instance, and they love the film. They think it's a very important message. So the Center for the American Experiment in Minnesota rented a movie theater, opened up the screening to the entire community free of charge to come and then unpack the issues in the film by a discussion with their president and two senior fellows. I mean, this kind of thing is happening. The leadership from the National Association for Scholars came to the New York premiere and then wrote on their website that this is a film that must be seen by all scholars. It's the influencers, the important influencers, those are just two examples. The important influencers think that the film is courageous and that it's right on target and that it must be seen. I mean, and the credit really needs to go to the brilliant minds and the courageous scholars and experts in the film. I mean, they are our thought leaders.
Absolutely. But Gloria, a lot of credit goes to you because you're the one that pieced it all together and you're the director. So I just want to thank you so much for being my guest, and kol hakavod to you. Thank you for keeping up the fight. Thank you for inspiring us all that we realise what's at stake. So thank you for being my guest on today's Middle East Report.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you all for watching this very important Middle East Report today, as we've shown extracts of Gloria's incredible film, The Fight of Our Lives, which is a very, very powerful film which communicates truth to our generation. It's important that we stand for truth, and we can do this by watching and getting hold of this film to show at our churches, because this is the battle that we're facing today. It's a battle for our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, our Judeo-Christian heritage, and everything that is sacred to us, our freedoms and our democracy. And so please, I encourage you all to watch this very, very powerful film and show your friends. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.